The good spirit of the Holy One is with us, the light of life, the hope of the world. Welcome everyone to this online service from Bentleigh Uniting Church in Melbourne. We gather on this winter's day from the comfort of our homes, whether through printed word or through the gift of technology. We're a community scattered yet together in spirit, in that ever welcoming presence of our God. This prayer. Holy One, in the warm embrace of your acceptance and love, quieten us to listen, reflect, and learn. May our spirits be lifted in hope and strengthened in courage. Amen. This morning I'd like to share with you a reflective poem by Bentleigh. It's entitled Welcome, a Place for Us. We long to find a place to relax, O God, to lean into the welcome and the love of real friends. Friends who stay true no matter who we are or what we've done. We want to be known. Not just our names, but ourselves, our dreams and longings, our fears and failings, and be warmly, unrestrainedly welcomed. We yearn to know the joy of opening our arms to others and seeing them melt and grow soft in the safety of our acceptance. And you have created a place like this for us, a place of people with failings and disagreements who still look out for one another, a place of difference and struggle where we can all belong, a place of faith and deep doubt, a place of awkward stumbling toward Christ-likeness, a place of worship, of mystery and of rest. And though we can't always see it, although sometimes it doesn't feel like it, this is the place, here. Not the buildings and the furniture, no, these people who gather each week in your name and try so hard to remember each other's. And for this place and your being with us, we give our heartfelt gratitude and devotion. Welcome. A place for us all. And we come now to our prayers of gratitude, lament, and renewal. This prayer. Holy One, we stand in awe and wonder at the beauty of your creation, the variety of plants and animals, all the peoples of the world in all their glorious diversity. We lament that in the face of your welcoming love for all, too often we stand at the door and turn people away. It's shameful how we find ways to justify, in your name, the lines we draw between us, the exclusions and suspicions, the greed and the power plays that harm the least and protect our special interests. God of all generosity, lift us above our pettiness and self-protection and use us as your agents of justice and compassion. Strengthen us to find more loving ways to live in community with one another. We open ourselves to your acceptance and grace, assured of your forgiveness and renewing strength and courage. May your grace open our doors, stretch out our arms, and turn our attention to the excluded, rejected, and neglected ones. May your wisdom teach our minds, open our hearts, and challenge our apathy to find solutions to the conflicts and self-created threats in our world. Make us heralds of your reign on earth, extending your warmth of welcome to all. This is our prayer. Amen. We come to our scriptures for this morning. We begin with the psalm. It's a psalm of lament. The psalmist cries out to God in his time of anguish and despair, but also affirms his trust in God's goodness and love. I read to you Psalm 13. How long, O God, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my anguish and wallow in despair all day long? How long will my enemy win over me? Look at me, answer me, Eternal One, my God. Give light to my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest my enemies say, I have prevailed, lest my foes rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your steadfast love. My heart rejoices in the deliverance you bring. I'll sing to you, Eternal One, for being so good to me. Psalm 13. We come to our first Testament reading from Genesis this morning. But before I introduce our First Testament reading from Genesis, I'd like to respectfully suggest that for this introduction, just for this introduction and for the Genesis reading, families with young children ensure that the young children are not listening to this part of our service today. This Bible story has themes that are unsuitable and potentially distressing for young children. But it will be fine for young children to return after that to hear the gospel reading and the remainder of the service. Today's reading from Genesis tells the story that's known as the binding of Isaac, or the sacrifice of Isaac. This account of Abraham's near sacrifice of his child Isaac is one of the Bible stories that down the ages people of faith have found both deeply disturbing and bewildering. Readers have tried to put themselves in Abraham's shoes. How could anyone consider sacrificing their child on an altar? But to understand the intent of this story, I think we need to avoid a psychological reading. The total lack of emotional responsiveness from Isaac and Abraham stands in stark contrast with the psalm we just heard, where the psalmist's very human predicament is expressed in strong emotional terms. The silence with regard to the characters' psychological dynamics is an indication that this Genesis story has a theological focus. But a further word of caution here. Because aspects of the imagery of the text echoes elements of the gospel story, some have read into it a prefiguring of Jesus' death. However, the Hebrew writers were not trying to foreshadow some kind of messianic death. The story holds its own theological truth. I think it's helpful to begin by recognising that in Sarah and Abraham's day, child sacrifice was common among the religions and cultures that surrounded them. And so this story originally provided part of an explanation as to why Israel, unlike many of its neighbours, didn't sacrifice children. The storyteller begins by telling us that God tested Abraham. So what exactly is being tested? I think a correct reading of this story is that Abraham passed the test of faith not by listening to the false gods of ritual violence at the beginning of the story, but rather by listening to the voice of Yahweh at the end of the story. The storyteller gives us clues to this understanding in the Hebrew words used for God. Elohim, the standard word for God in Hebrew, referring to any and all gods, including false gods, commands the sacrifice of Isaac at the beginning of the story. However, the messenger of Yahweh, the special name for God in Hebrew, the sacred name of God revealed to Moses, calls to Abraham to stop the sacrifice as the knife is raised in the air. Abraham's faith is shown in that he heard the true God's voice telling him not to kill. This use of differing names for God points us to be alert to an unfolding understanding of God, a God of justice and compassion who calls us to peace and not violence, to do not the least harm to a child. Indeed, all the major prophets stress that God doesn't want sacrifice, but rather compassionate justice. Today's passage opens with the words, "after these events." It follows not long after the story we heard last Sunday, where Abraham sent away his firstborn child, Ishmael. So at the passage's opening, we're reminded that as a result of this, Abraham has only one child left. This aspect is highlighted in the telling of this story, which I'll read to you now. Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 to 14. After these events, God tested Abraham. "Abraham," God called. "Here I am," Abraham replied. "Take your son," God said, "your only child Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will point out to you." Rising early the next morning, Abraham saddled the donkey and took along 2 workers and his son Isaac. Abraham chopped wood for the burnt offering and started on the journey to the place God showed them. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Then Abraham said to the workers, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship and come back to you." Abraham took wood for the burnt offering and gave it to Isaac to carry. In his own hands he carried the fire and the knife. Then the 2 of them went on alone. Isaac said, "Father." "Here I am, my child," Abraham replied. "Here are the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "My child, God will provide the lamb for the burnt offering." Then the 2 of them went on together. When they arrived at the place God had pointed out, Abraham built an altar there and arranged wood on it. Then he bound, tied up, his son Isaac, and put him on the altar on top of the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand and seized the knife to kill the child. But the angel of God called to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not raise your hand against the boy," the angel said. "Do not do the least thing to him. I now know how deeply you revere God, since you did not refuse me your son, your only child." Then looking up, Abraham saw a ram caught by its horns in a bush. He went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his child. Abraham called the place God Provides. And so it is said to this day, "On this mountain, God provides." Genesis 22. And now we come to our gospel reading for this morning. Today's gospel reading from Matthew concerns the gospel call to hospitality. We're called to welcome and accept others. In the First Testament, hospitality was expected of all of God's people. We see this in a variety of First Testament stories. We heard it enacted a couple of Sundays ago when we read the story of the 3 travellers, so eagerly welcomed and offered hospitality by Abraham and Sarah. And we read throughout the Gospel stories numerous accounts of Jesus enacting hospitality and urging his followers to do likewise. In this passage from Gospel storyteller Matthew, the Greek word apodokomai translated as welcome, connotes acceptance. So I read to you Matthew chapter 10, verses 40 to 42. Those who welcome you also welcome me, and those who welcome me also welcome the one who sent me. Those who welcome prophets just because they are prophets will receive the reward reserved for the prophets themselves. Those who welcome holy people just because they are holy will receive the reward of the holy ones. The truth is, whoever gives a cup of cold water to one of these lowly ones just for being a disciple will not lack a reward. These are words of faith. Thanks be to God. And I offer you this reflection. The story is told of a monastery that was renowned for its hospitality, a welcoming place for many weary travellers in need of rest. One day, while the abbot was deep in prayer, an angel appeared, surrounded by golden light. The abbot gazed in rapt contemplation and was filled with a peace beyond measure. Suddenly, a series of heavy knocks resounded on the front door. It is some weary traveller come to find shelter, the abbot said to himself. What should I do? If I go and answer the door, the angel might disappear. If I stay, who will care for the traveller? Reluctantly, the abbot rose, looked resignedly at the angel, and left the room in order to attend to the needs of the dust-stained traveller. When he returned to his cell, the angel, to the abbot's great surprise, was still there. The angel said to him, "Had you not gone to help the needy traveller, I myself would have been compelled to leave." The story reminds us that hospitality is central to the life of faith. True hospitality involves not simply welcoming others, but also full acceptance of others, as God fully accepts us without requiring anything of them or expecting anything in return. As we noted earlier in today's reading from the Gospel storyteller, Matthew, the Greek word apodekemai, translated as welcome, connotes acceptance. It's a sense of welcome that entails being received and accepted just as you are, just as you are. And living out this kind of acceptance is not so much about what we do as the way we do it, the way we give of ourselves to others, the way we are present to others. Our attitudes and level of attention, our listening, our empathy, our respect, our acceptance of all people, however different they may be from ourselves. Acceptance of those for whatever reason don't fit inside the usual square of social respectability. Those who fall outside of the mainstream. Those whose gifts and abilities don't fit into the usually recognised boxes. Those in our society who are marginalised and at times vilified because of their ethnicity or colour or mental health or social status or sexual orientation. Jesus' words in Matthew's Gospel connect our relationships with others to our relationship with God. We welcome and encounter God in encountering the other. Each one of us bears the image of God. In India, Ram Dass writes, when people meet and part, they often say, Namaste, which means, I honour the place in you. where the entire universe resides. I honour the place in you of love, of light, of truth, of peace. I honour the place within you where if you are in that place in you and I am in that place in me, there is only one of us. Namaste. In the gospel teaching as well, hospitality is more than an open door or giving charity. It's about recognising the face of God in others and valuing the gifts they bring. Across his ministry, Jesus teaches his followers to help those in need. But in today's passage, the instructions Jesus gives his disciples are also about receiving welcome. They're about what it looks like and feels like for followers of Jesus to accept welcome from others, however socially lowly in their status. And I think by extension, Jesus points us to be willing to learn from those who are very different from ourselves, those who we find hard to identify with, to be open to hearing their wisdom, to lovingly accept others who may have very different ways of living, those who hold opposing views or very different perspectives from our own. Jesus tells his disciples that the people who welcome them will be richly rewarded. Notably, there is reward for the small gestures, the serving of a cup of water. This reward is not only for those who welcome the prophets and holy ones, the prominent and sophisticated voices, the religious luminaries. The reward is also for those who serve the unnoticed, the ordinary, the lowly folk. Those who welcome and serve in simple yet valuable ways, pouring cold drinks, setting food on the table, listening empathically to the humblest of personal stories. In these pandemic times, we have seen that the essential workers, the cleaners, the supermarket staff, the home care attendants, are not generally the people that we might glamorise. Yet the value of their contribution has been underlined in recent months. The text makes clear that meeting basic human need and small gestures of kindness are pleasing to God, even a cup of cold water. We often think about hospitality as being about hosting guests. The host naturally has the power and control over proceedings. The host determines the guest list, plans the menu, sets the table and seating arrangements. But I wonder, what might it mean if instead of inviting others to be our guests, we invited them to be our co-hosts, to share in compiling the guest list, share in the planning of who sits where and how the food is cooked? I wonder, are we willing to share our power? In our extended families and church communities, are we willing to welcome active participation from others who might stretch us beyond our usual comfort zones? Are we truly willing to receive and accept hospitality, to be another's guest? To learn from those outside our familiar contexts, from those on the margins? Are we willing to be the ones who are given a cup of water? Today, I think both the ancient story of the binding of Isaac and the gospel message invite us to reflect on who we choose to welcome, to hear, to defend, and to protect. We're repulsed by the ritual child sacrifice of Abraham and Sarah's ancient world. Yet in our modern day culture, we sacrifice our children to the gods of war and power and greed. In our contemporary world, are we willing to find and practice ways to peace beyond sending our children to be sacrificed in war? Are we willing to defend others' human right to dignity, to safety and security? Are we willing to hear and receive wisdom from peoples and cultures long downtrodden by the rich and powerful? Are we willing to responsibly protect our planet's resources so that we do not sacrifice the health and well-being of future generations. Indeed, it is in welcoming, receiving from, and protecting those who others would reject and sacrifice that we truly see and hear the God in our midst. We come to our prayers for others and ourselves. This prayer. Good Spirit of God, you beckon us into life and compassion by disguising yourself in broken humanity. When our eyes are opened, we discover that we are never far from your heart, from your kingdom. And so we ask you to show yourself to us again and lead us into prayerful action. Help us to share your grief when lives are needlessly lost simply because they have no money for food or shelter, because they have no access to medicine and care, because they have no choice but to live where war and violence constantly threaten. Help us to feel your offence when the least are exploited by the lust of those who are physically stronger, by the greed of those who are financially richer, by the disregard of those who are politically more powerful. Help us to know your pain when what you have created is destroyed by the carelessness of expediency, by the short-sightedness of progress at all costs, by the sense of entitlement of proud humanity. Teach us to welcome you by welcoming those in whom your image is hidden, and by working in our small worlds to make visible your kingdom where all are welcomed. This morning, as we reflect on the issues of this day and our wider world, may we honour the many ways in which people in many places offer healing and hope into the world. The medical teams and carers and all essential workers who work to heal the sick and keep our communities safe. We're mindful this morning of those among our church community who are suffering from illness, of those who are grieving, of those who are rehabilitating from surgeries and injuries, and those experiencing pain and losses arising from ill health. Let's pause a moment as we bring to mind those who have particular special needs at this time. May all those in need know the comfort of your consoling, caring presence. Loving God, keep our eyes open to the presence of your light, our ears open to hear your wisdom, ever guiding us in the welcoming warmth of your love. This is our prayer. Amen. And this blessing, the beauty of God be reflected in your eyes. The peace of God reside in your heart. And the love of God be the focus of your life, this day and all days. Amen.